Hey there, creative people. How you doing, buds? Welcome to the Creative People Podcast. My name is Ryan Leacock, and this is the podcast for those of us who pick up our creativity and do something with it. Today on the podcast, I'm talking with Rose Gabler. Rose has written a book called The Creativity Gene, and we really get into the thick of it about creativity this week. Rose has a pretty fascinating story, and she tells me about a massive life change her grandfather had after a cancer scare and how that decision rippled through generations of her family. To be honest, when Rose and I first connected, I was a little skeptical, and maybe it's because I was feeling a little territorial about creativity. I know it's stupid, but whatever. But then she sent me her book, and I was going through it, and I was like, man, she knows what's up. Rose and I may approach creativity from different perspectives, but we really had a great time meeting in the middle today. So you're going to really enjoy this conversation. It's a good one. This weekend, I was up in Kingston, Ontario, getting tattooed. Shout out to the Foundry Tattoo, Andrew Odenoff. He was on the podcast episode 10 or so. Another side note, 4 kids, solo weekend away was a total gift. On Saturday afternoon, I decided I wanted to meet some local creatives, and so I found my way to the craft market at the St. Lawrence College. I spoke and connected with like a ton of people and their friends, and it was really great. One of the things that struck me was there was this older gentleman, and I mean quite old, and he did traditional, more European artwork. It wasn't his target market, let's say, but his paintings that were all around him were beautiful. And I stood there, and even though he didn't want to talk to me, that's fair, I felt a kinship with this man because all those things that were surrounding him were beautiful works that he just had to get out of them, and I admired him, and I was glad I met him. In general, it was just really nice to be in another city and spend the afternoon chatting with creative people who are going after the things inside of them, you know, the things that they have to make. So shout out to the creative people of Kingston, Ontario. I think that's enough bumper talk, enough nonsense for me. Let's get into it with Rose Gabler and her book, The Creativity Gene. Hi, Rose.
Hi, Ryan.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
I'm very curious to get into this with you. You like wrote the book on creativity. Like that's a huge thing. So I'm pretty excited about this. So if you're all good, we can just dive into it. What I like to do is have people introduce themselves, tell everyone what they do, and then we'll just kind of get into it.
Hi, I'm Rose Gabler. I am an author and creativity coach, and I am so excited to be here on the Creative People Podcast.
So I got to know, what led to writing a book on creativity?
Oh my gosh, such a lifelong journey without realizing it, which is the fun part of it. Yeah, so actually going backwards in time, my grandfather, he owned the largest funeral homes in the Midwest.
Okay. All right.
And so he always associated life with business, and that was kind of like the drive for him, you know. And when he turned 40, he went to the doctor's office, and he was told he had a rare type of cancer, that he had a rare type of leukemia, and he was going to die within months. And he decided in that moment that if he lived through the disease, he was going to sell all of his funeral homes and start painting for peace, hope, and love, and focus on life rather than death.
Wow.
And my grandma said, you've not only lost your health, you've lost your mind. But he decided he had to get a second opinion and see what was really going on. So he went to the Mayo Clinic, and they told him, you don't have cancer, you have mono. And so he sold all of his funeral homes and started painting. So my introduction into the art world really was that business was associated with death and art was associated with life.
Wow.
For the longest time, I always thought they were separate because that was such a huge distinction for him, you know, and it just kind of trickled down throughout our family. My mom followed him into the art world, and so I just naturally followed along, and I didn't think that there was really a connection between business and life and creativity. Throughout my studies, you know, I studied art history, I studied international business, I got my master's degree in business of arts and culture. I was really trying to find that connection, bridge that gap.
Okay.
And so after years and years of studying and interviewing people about how they perceive their life and their business as art, I jumped into writing this book. creativity gene. I was able to find that kind of connection over a very long time.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it was very fascinating journey to like reflect upon, really.
Yeah. It's interesting too that that question wasn't good enough to not be answered for you. Like you're like, well, is there a connection between these two? Do you remember
Mhm.
when you kind of like decided I'm going to find that out?
So probably right after college, I went into my first, real world job.
Okay.
And I found myself being drawn to the creative aspects of it, like marketing, social media, like the traditionally creative aspects of business. But I also found myself being promoted into a retail sales position
Yeah.
and was like looking for ways to express creativity in that field. So I was like creating new processes and like just finding new ways to be efficient and organized, and noticed that my creativity was coming out in a
Mm,
totally different manner than I had ever experienced it before.
interesting. So was that like a, hey, this is not what I was kind of told this was?
Right, exactly.
Oh, I like that.
It was just like I studied art history, like got my undergrad degree in it, and I was like, there's a lot of creativity that you learn about how like art comes about throughout history. It's a
Yeah.
reflection of what's happening around them.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm in a retail sales position and I'm being creative. Like this is not normal. So I was just kind of like totally flabbergasted by that whole interaction, really, when I finally came to the realization of it. And just wanted to continue to find that gap in other industries. I started writing a blog a couple of years ago,
Okay.
just interviewing people of all different fields, all different industries, experts in every different region and like idea and business that you can think of, to try to understand how they perceive their work as art.
I see. Interesting.
And yeah, that's just kind of how it continued to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah. I love that story. And I love that like your grandfather needed to make that hard break, but it's not necessarily a break everyone needs to make. And
Exactly.
it's nice, two generations later, you come and kind of be like, well, there's middle ground. And that's probably a more healthy way to approach it, like than
Yeah.
not doing it your whole life. I mean, nothing, but it's still more, we want to like have balanced lives.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so it's nice that you kind of got to, continue that journey for him.
Mhm.
Is he still around? I'm sorry, I should probably know that.
No, he passed away in 2012, but he lived till he was 80.
Wow.
So he went from a 6-month diagnosis to 40 years. So
Mm.
it was pretty incredible.
It's interesting though, too, that he didn't just go back to like life before that. It was something
Right.
started going in his brain that was like, okay, well, I can't turn this off now.
Right. Yeah. And he had never studied art, never done anything traditionally with it before in his life, never even picked up a paintbrush or a crayon.
Yeah.
And to like devote his life to it without ever even doing it before, it was like such a roller coaster of emotions and experiences for our family that ultimately just led to being like us. I think it really just helped instill in all of us a sense of like purpose fulfilling.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we stuck true and hard to that. And I'm excited that it is kind of like continuing from his, initial hard break, that I don't have
Yeah.
to have a hard break.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
enjoy all aspects of creativity wherever it is.
Yeah. I love also that it kind of touches upon one of the reasons that like all of us are doing this in some ways, that if you're facing the end, there's some stuff inside of you that's like, well, I'm not leaving without checking out that, right? And I
Hmm.
think for creative people, it's like, well, if I have something inside of me I want to write, I'm not done on this planet until it's done, right?
Right.
And I think that's a romantic side of creativity for me, at least. I don't know, I just like it. I really like that. For me, when I had kids, it was like, it was kind of that same like, oh, I better do something now.
Yeah, I understand.
So
That's funny.
with you obviously grew up with this kind of like in the background of everything. Do you remember taking on creativity for yourself at an early age? Do you remember like, oh, maybe this is my aspect? Like, was there you kind of looking for your like a lane in creativity when you were younger?
Yeah, a little bit, because my grandfather and my mom were both so deeply into the art world. Like my mom was in pottery, my grandfather painted
Yeah.
anything and everything, like even Prada bags, Gucci bags. He was like, give me, taking them out of my grandma's closet and stuff.
Poor grandma.
Paint. Yeah.
So much.
So funny. I really kind of followed along into the painting when I was younger,
Yeah.
but it didn't really resonate with me. And journaling was something that I have always done.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily think of it as a creative outlet until I was in my master's program, which is when I really kind of figured out that writing can be my creative expression.
Yeah.
And it can be, my canvas. I don't have to have a canvas and a paintbrush. I can have a blank document and a keyboard or a pen and paper.
Yeah.
And that can be the way that I share my creativity with the world. I think that when I finally accepted and realized that during my master's program was the defining moment for me to really invest in writing, and the moment that I really knew that I wanted to write a book about this journey.
It was like a 5-year journey to write the book. Is that
It was a 5-year journey of knowing I wanted to write a book.
okay?
And it took me 6 months to write it when I finally sat down and did it, because I had all of this experience and knowledge. I had contacts with people who I knew I wanted to interview for the book, and I knew a lot of the like foundational elements of the book. So writing became an easier flow
Yeah,
for me.
you were prepared for it. That's kind of,
Yeah.
when you were writing blogs, you were kind of like getting your getting all the info so you can distill it into the book. I love that. When you started out, was there any surprises? Where, like, how did that go when you started out with the blog and everything in this journey?
Well, the blog was just really for fun. I didn't keep up on like analytics of it or anything. I really just wanted to know more about people and how they perceive creativity.
Yeah.
Because there's one thing about creativity that I learned through the book process and through my blog process, is that everybody defines creativity differently.
Okay.
I have never gotten the same definition twice.
Yeah.
That was something that has always stuck with me when it comes to people being on their creative journeys, because it's always a unique and personal adventure,
Mhm.
And that became kind of challenging, because it's like, if everybody has their own understanding of creativity, how do I find a universally approachable way to discern like what I've learned and what I've experienced about creativity and growth and personal and professional merging together through creativity and so on.
Mhm.
So I realized that I had to kind of redefine creativity. So once I made that leap, that helped a lot throughout the journey itself. And my personal definition of creativity is your unique ability to produce new results.
Yep. That sounds like my brain does not, my it doesn't like, my brain doesn't like definitions. So when you said that, I was like, whoa, I'm like, 2 textbook. So can you say it again?
Your unique ability to produce new results.
Yes, that is exactly what it is, distilled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Everybody, due to like what their expertise is, their environment, their perspective on creativity, if they think it's traditionally focused, like in the art realm, everybody comes to it with their own perspective.
Yeah.
And so, trying to find a universally approachable sentence that encompasses what creativity is was a huge challenge.
Yeah.
But it's ultimately the challenge that I think is what has made the creativity gene so accessible and relatable.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it kind of whittles it down to, no matter what your perspective is, it's you doing something new, and the only person that can do it is you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. We came to a very similar path for very different reasons. Mine was, okay, we're all doing the same thing within reason. We all have the same frustrations within within a scope. we're all kind of dealing with the same thing. And it was listening to other podcasts, and I listened to comedians or writers, and they would say something and I'd be like, oh my God, I do that. And I thought I was a weirdo. And I thought, and from my life, I felt very isolated and kind of alone in my creativity. So it was actually like, if we're all the same in this, I want to start, I want to start putting it together in one place, all the sameness. And kind of that's what made me start. But yours was kind of like, everyone's different. How do I connect it? I love that we're kind of like on opposite ends of the yin yang of that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great way of like putting into an image as well, a yin yang of creativity.
Yeah.
It all comes together, which is what I've ultimately learned.
Yeah. So once you kind of started off on this journey, I love that you just opened up, like, I'm going to talk to everybody.
It was so interesting. I was interviewing people, like executives from companies like Motorola and BMW. And then I was also interviewing people that are accountants. And like this gentleman was so adamant that he was not creative. He was like, I don't understand why you're interviewing me for a creativity book.
Yeah.
Because his belief was that if he's creative, that he, in his sense of creativity, that he could lose his job.
Yeah. It's like a euphemism for breaking the law.
Right. Yeah. He's like, I can't be creative with numbers. And I was like, well, maybe it's not the actual job that is creative, but it's how you like process or build things. He also is a professor. And we discovered through like deeper conversation about what inspires him that he actually plans his accounting programs based off of his reaction to classical music.
Okay.
And I was like, don't you think that that's like a creative transformation of like knowledge and experience and like what? And he was like, I guess, like, I just considered it problem solving. And I was like, well, problem solving is also like fixing a microwave or something, So it was just such an interesting dynamic, and it's such an interesting conversation from somebody who is in a field that is generally not associated with creativity.
Yeah.
And interviewing doctors, that was also crazy because they have their best practices, obviously. Yeah. And nobody wants their doctor to get creative when they're like laying on the surgery table or something, which is totally understandable. But like I spoke with a doctor who was teaching CPR to underprivileged areas. And when COVID hit, she had to discover a new way of teaching CPR where they couldn't use the dummy.
Yeah.
Because the dummy was like too expensive for these communities to get themselves, and she couldn't travel and everything. So through a lot of experimentation and just curiosity, she discovered that a 2-liter soda bottle has the same amount of pressure that a dummy has. So if you fill it with air, you can use it and you can practice CPR on it just as you would a dummy mannequin. So it was, oh, bless you. So it was just a like crazy creative transformation. And now that program is like taking off worldwide.
Crazy.
It's just, so doctors like and accountants, they can be creative too.
Yeah. I like you brought up the 2 times that like creativity, obviously, like we've dedicated a fair amount of life to it. So it's like this great word for us. But there are some, it's like, yeah, my doctor got creative. You're like, not
again. Right. Yeah.
So it's not always.
Exactly.
I love what you're saying. Was there times where people are like pushing back, like, I'm not creative, and you're like, I'll find it? Like, was it like,
oh yeah, it became like a mission.
Yeah. I imagine.
Exactly.
And then they like say the thing and you see their eyes light up and you're like, there it is.
Yeah. Exactly. It was I was like, I'm not getting off this call until we figure out what it is, basically.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
It was so fun. I made it like it was like a game, but it was also just like so fulfilling for me to help them realize their creativity. And ultimately, that's what I think the creativity gene is. It's something that connects all of us too. And it's not like a physical scientific gene, even though there is research that creativity can be passed down through generations. I really just wanted to showcase that it is everywhere and it is in everyone, no matter what field they're in or what interests them, what their expertise is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it definitely challenged me in a good way.
Yeah. Like your book has instruction and like stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Talk to me about taking it that next step further.
I talk about like the myths and the truths of creativity,
Yeah.
because there are so many beliefs that people allow their creativity to be hindered by, or like from fear, vulnerability, imposter syndrome, and needing permission for it, and so on. All these things that kind of stop us in our tracks when we're trying to be creative. And so I really wanted to identify from my interviews what I observed to be the 5 main contributing factors to creative growth.
Yeah.
And they were your life experience, your environment, your expertise, your flexibility, and your grit. So diving into each one of those aspects of who you are and what you've done and how you've done it, and kind of just like your overall life experience, helps to identify those creative strengths that you do have.
Yeah. Now, see, so I'll say this, and it's going to sound like I'm like pushing back, but I'm not at all. I feel that sometimes, and I think one of your myths was like that creativity is like not magical. Like I disagree pretty strongly, actually. Okay, let me define magical first of all. Is that because we don't really understand it and something happens that that is outside of our control and feels special, that is fine, and like that's enough of a magical. It's not like actual like, Cinderella bippity boppity boo. But
Yeah.
when you have a certain song on, or you have a certain conversation, and then this light bulb goes off and you see the world in a completely new way, that's the closest thing I know in life that's magic, because you see the world all new, and I think it's one of the best parts of being creative is that we get to play in that way more than other people, that we get to have that experience.
Yeah.
And I think there's something magical about that. And like, I just want to know your opinion when I say all that, because we're coming from what I'm looking forward to, and what I'm loving about this conversation is we're coming at this from like very different ways in some ways, right? Like I've been talking to creative people for 2 years. I haven't written a list about the 5 things but I have like a list of the common experiences that we've had. So when I say all that, what do you think of that? What's your take?
No, I totally agree with the fact that there are moments that are just like sparking complete and total, fresh new experiences of creative like epiphanies. I totally and wholeheartedly believe in that aspect of creativity. To say that it is like, yeah, I also agree with your definition of magic, but to say that there's nothing in your past that has not contributed to that moment, even like the lack of not experiencing it, I think that's where the difference lies. Because where like, okay, you're listening to a song and something comes to your mind that's totally new and different, like how you got there is still from somewhere within you.
Yeah.
It's still from somewhere in your experiences that's led you to this moment, this epiphany, this new idea. So while I wouldn't define it as magic as you would, I would still believe that is like a truly genuine, authentically creative, fueled moment for sure.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll get like you have those times where you've sat down to write and it's like all there. Like it's just like you download it. Those are the best. And
yeah, it's great. Yeah.
I'm fine with defining that as magic. I think some people are just more comfortable with magical thinking.
Yeah.
I think as long as you kind of know in the back of your mind, it's like, there's probably like a completely rational explanation for, how this played out. But sometimes things become more than they are. And that's magic too.
Yeah.
Like as soon as sorry, I'm like on this magic trip, like
yeah,
good design in general. And when something works, that's magical. Like when you see a movie, how many movies come out per year, but then you leave and you're like, this movie changed me, or a book, or that's that magic stuff too. And I think for some of us, that's what we're chasing. I don't know,
Yeah, totally. And, one of my favorite quotes that helped keep me going through writing this book was by Marcel Duchamp, one of my favorite French artists who you're probably very familiar with. But he says that words have a bigger meaning than the definition in the dictionary.
Yeah.
And that is what kept me going, searching creativity, because
Yeah. Oh, I love
like trying to understand what this all-encompassing word is daunting. It's overwhelming, and trying to search for magic can be overwhelming and daunting. But to whatever you define it as, to have the grit, to have the motivation and the inspiration and the drive to keep looking for it, like that is ultimately what matters.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
And I love that quote. Like, when I hear you say that, and that was like your guiding light, and then I look at your book again, it's like, well, here I'm defining it, but we know it's like more than can be defined in this book. That's
right.
I don't know. I love that.
It doesn't match very well, but it does show like where my drive came from, like why I was seeking this clarity on creativity, and just to be able to make it more approachable and applicable, and like change it to the magic gene, whatever that feeling is for you. For me, it's knowing my creative strengths, and it can be different for everybody, as we know.
Well, that's the thing, right? I think with definitions of creativity, ultimately the best definition is the one that gets you working and gets you in the stuff. So if someone read that and it doesn't resonate with them, maybe another part is going to be like, oh, it's bigger than the definition. Whatever's like turning that fire on, I think it's good.
Yes, exactly.
But that's what makes it hard to define for everyone, because everyone has that different click start. And
right.
We're also dealing with kind of invisible forces of what goes on in people's heads.
Totally.
Messy, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So all your research, all your great experiences in finding the different creativity in different people, how has that affected your creativity?
It continues to motivate and fuel me like nothing else I've ever experienced in my life.
Yeah.
Every time I have a conversation about creativity, or I'm also helping people right now, I'm helping entrepreneurs take their information and transforming it into books that they can give to their clients, and continue to like build this creative growth. I am beaming. I literally cannot stop. When I start writing about it, I can't stop writing. After writing this book, I've started 2 other books. I'm publishing one in January.
Oh, congrats. What's that one called?
Thank you. This one is totally different, but it's just like, I love it so much. My mom has always wanted to write a book from her time of living above the funeral home that my grandfather owned. And she lived there for like the first, 18 years of her life. Yeah. And from the age of 15 and on, or 14 and on, actually, she lived above the funeral home alone. My grandparents moved to a different place. And so she was in charge of like bringing in all the dead bodies every night and setting up for funerals and wakes.
Did they make your life into a show when they made 6 Feet Under? Holy, like that's the purpose of that show.
Yeah. My mom watched it and she was like, they got like some things right, but the real stuff is even better. I was like, I'm sure. And so she was like, they're just the craziest stories and the best memories, like that she is just ready to share. She dictated her stories to me and I wrote the stories out. We like worked on it together. We worked on it for, I think, like 6.5 months. It's called Laid to Rest, My Hopes, Haunts, and Humors from Living Above a Funeral Home.
I love that.
And it's bizarre, but it is so interesting.
Yeah.
And the core message throughout it all is we're progressing on hope. And which is not something that a lot of people associate with funeral homes. So it's a crazy journey about like her wildest and weirdest funerals that she had to direct as a child, and like growing up above a funeral home in general, and like having a brother that used to play hide and seek with her in caskets. And so it's, yeah, that's just been like such a fun and like different creative
Yeah.
adventure for me.
And you get to go on it with your mom. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Hear those stories and then like record them. That's such a, I don't know, that's like also why I love creativity, because it brought you and your mom together for a purpose and you made something together. Like, that's so
Yeah,
special. That's like,
it was. Yeah.
I love that so much. So that comes out in January. Nice. I'll keep an eye out for that. One of the questions I like to ask is like, picture your creativity in a physical form. So again, we're going to like magical thinking inside our brain. But if you were to give it a physical form, what would that look like for you?
I love this question. I think it is such an interesting take on like taking something that you have like a perception of and reimagining it as something else. And I would have to go with an umbrella.
Yeah.
My grandfather also worked a lot with umbrellas, and I think that's why this image kind of resonates with me a lot when it comes to my creative journey.
Yeah.
Because the way that he thought of an umbrella was that it's all encompassing. Like anybody can stand under the umbrella. It doesn't matter what color your skin is, what your beliefs are, what your job is, like where you live. It doesn't matter. Like everybody can be under the umbrella and be protected from the rain outside. But the umbrella has to be picked up and opened in order to do what it needs to do. So it takes that commitment, that action to actually opening it and accepting the fact that there are all these different elements that are a part of you and around you that you have to accept and you have to work with in order to move forward.
Yeah.
Because an umbrella on the floor means nothing, you know? So
yeah.
With that in mind, that's where my connection to creative growth really lies, because creativity encompasses so many different aspects of who we are. Yeah. And there are so many external aspects of our world that contribute to it that we have to either learn to accept or learn how to work with, or we enjoy working with it, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter what it is. It is what it is.
I really like that. And I love like thinking about creativity that way, because it gives a good mental image to like common ground, you know, that's happening out there, but here we're under this together and we're making something together. And it is kind of like you make your own little, because that's what an umbrella does. It makes a little space. When it's raining, it's like, because we define our spaces, as soon as it's like pouring rain, it is a little space. And I love that, like intimate, like, so even when you're telling a story about you and your mom writing this book, you can imagine you two like under your little umbrella of the book. Like,
yeah.
That's so charming.
Yeah, exactly.
Did that evolve as you learned about creativity more and different people and how it plays out, or did it just strengthen?
I think it just strengthened. I think it made me realize that the umbrella is bigger than I thought it was. And that more and more, like I am actually happy to welcome more and more into my umbrella. You know, your umbrella is like a safe space, and you want to protect it, but you also want to empower it. And the more that I welcomed people into the umbrella, the more I learned, the more excited I became about continuing the journey, and the more like power I put behind actually making it happen. Yeah.
And I love also that my problem with creativity before was I used to think about it as something that would happen to me. And it's because of that, it's the bad side of magical thinking that like messed me up for a long time, because it would be like, I know there's times where I can like do this and I can have those moments where I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then it leaves for months. I didn't understand that there was the great thing about the umbrella is that there's a connection, there's effort, there's, you know, you have to take responsibility, but then once you've done that, then that connection's made, and then it just exists. But you have to wake up and do that every single day, right?
Yep.
I like to think about that as like showing up in my life. If I'm not showing up, that's in my creativity or anything like that, then the umbrella stays on the floor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I really, really like that. How's the feedback been? Like, as you've kind of gotten the book out into the world, have you heard back from people? Like, how's that gone?
Yeah, I'm actually like overwhelmed with how much positive response I've had from the book, because you never know when you're putting your creativity out into the world, and when you're
Yeah,
being vulnerable, and when
yeah,
you're opening it up to a public arena, you never know how it's going to react. And the reactions that I have been getting have been so inspiring. I feel like it's so humbling, so just like such beautiful connections of creativity that have been made. And I'm finding people from throughout my life that I haven't spoke to in years reaching out to me saying that they feel like the spark to create again, or they never felt that they were creative and now they realize that they were. Just so many different levels of creative progression happening.
yeah,
And that was ultimately the goal that I was hoping to reach, was just helping people acknowledge the creativity within them.
yeah,
And so it's been such an awesome journey, which I think is why I can't stop now.
yeah,
Like just watch out, because my fingers won't stop typing. And it's but it's been such a wonderful and beautiful and exciting, connecting, creative journey. And I just hope that it continues.
yeah.
Like the creativity, it's like a ripple effect. When somebody starts, another person can get sparked by it, and it just keeps going.
Yeah, yeah. I love that aspect of creativity too. I grew up religious and I've left that. And
Mm,
the connection that I see in creativity reminds me of the good aspects of growing up religious. It was just like, oh, that
yeah.
common ground, that connection, working towards a common goal. And when you're being creative and you're, to use your umbrella, you want to treat people well. You want to like, those
Hmm.
things, something in us wants to do that. And I find creativity is one of the ones that just it can connect people from completely different walks of life. I think that's so
Yes.
special. Is there a similar thing that you hear from a lot of people that like they struggle with in their creativity?
A lot of it is fear.
Yeah.
Fear is a huge aspect. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of imposter syndrome, fear of actually being creative, like, oh my God, I'm creative. Now what? Like, what happens next? Like, so, yeah, right, exactly. So it's a lot of different levels of fear that come into play. And I don't know if you've read the book The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield,
That book
but
fucking changed my life. Like,
right?
like it was just like, what? Like,
Oh my
oh my
gosh.
goodness. Yeah. That guy.
It's so
And then I read everything that he, not his novels, but like I read all through them and I've gone through them multiple times, like with audiobooks.
yes.
And it was like, oh yeah. So keep going. I'm on the same.
Yeah. Well, I think that fear is like the resistance that he
Yeah.
speaks about,
Yeah.
and it's one of the main ones that everybody experiences in every day in every walk of life. There's all these different fears. But I think that what makes this realization so powerful when it comes to creativity is knowing that the more you create, the less that fear speaks,
Yeah.
basically. It's something that you obviously have to just continue to do in order to get past it. But once you do, it's like it's like this feeling you can't stop.
Yeah. I think that's also where we struggle with like, because it's not defined in fear. So it's like just gets in everything. Right. So I remember Stephen
Hmm.
talking in his book about like what he has to do. And like, it's like he has a thing that he says before and like he prays to the muse or what. When I hear that, it sounds very magical, but I'm starting to just think like the most of our life is just helpful narratives, right? So that's what
Mm.
allows him to fight the resistance and get into that zone. But fear, it's another one of those things where people get around their fears in weird ways, and it it doesn't help in the long run, like if you're trying to understand creativity, because it kind of turns into like the superstition of it. That's like, well, I can only
Right.
do this because you've taught yourself. One day I was afraid, and then one I thought it this way, and I got around it. And you want to keep doing
Hmm.
that, and then it becomes like, well, this is how I do it now. And then if someone else
Yeah.
deals with it in a different way, then it's like, well, maybe I'm not like them. I don't deal with my creativity. And then that misunderstanding keeps going, right? I think that's how
Exactly.
a lot of what people view as like, oh, you can only be creative this way. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think that that's definitely one of these aspects that fuels that fear
Yeah.
ultimately. It like even if they can get around it, it's just like there's like, did I get around it? How did I get around it? Like, you know,
will I get
all
around
these
it
like
tomorrow? Like,
right. Yeah.
I hope I can, because now I've like, or you start making commitments, you're like, okay, I know how to get around my fear so I can make, but now I've made a commitment to write a book or do a thing. Like, well, I hope I can get around it enough to do that. Like,
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting personal journey, but the cure is acting on it, just doing it.
Yeah.
You know? So
it's like going back to that umbrella thing. It's like, it doesn't have to be so complicated. It might,
right.
it might not work right away either, right? It's a process. The first day you choose to, if it is just an action and a choice, the first day it's not going to be like, oh, I turned on but you keep with it and your brain will catch up. Your creativity will show up most of the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to
exactly
be a whole story, right?
Right. Yeah.
Have you dealt with fear?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Oh my gosh. It, like I said before, when like mentioning when I was publishing my book,
Yeah.
how much I was shaking when I pressed the publish button, like, because I did self-publishing through Amazon. Like, wow, I was freaking out, and I was lucky enough to have had the fear come through while writing the book, that I had like worked through fear throughout writing. So when I got there and I was just like, all I have to do is just press this button. Like, I wasn't even looking at it. It's like, just press it and then you're done. Like, then you're good. But I had to hire a mentor, like right as I began writing the book, because I knew that there were going to be so many aspects that I was not going to know about writing a book that were going to fuel my fear even more. So I hired somebody a coach who's now like a really great friend, and she has written and self-published maybe like 6 best-selling books on Amazon, and she knew all the ins and outs of everything that I didn't know, you know? And so all I had to do was worry about writing the book, and then she was going to help me with the step-by-step process of actually physically getting it done, like what needed to be done by when and how to make it happen. And so that relieved so much fear and stress from my creative process, that I was able to just focus in on like what was actually challenging me in the moment while writing, that I could continue to work through without the distraction of external fears, just from lack of knowledge, you know?
And those
we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah. And so it can actually be very simple, but when you don't know it and you have a bad writing day and you're like, and I haven't figured out this, it can just be like a huge elephant of fear. Like, I don't know anything. You know?
Exactly. Yeah. And I knew that something like that could have stopped me from finishing my book. Just like, because logistics are something that I'm just like so confused by sometimes, especially like, right? Like you just, like I said, you don't know what you don't know. And so I was like, I'd rather find somebody who knows.
Yeah.
And now that I know, I can do it again and again and again. And like, I don't have to worry or fear that part of writing at all.
Yeah.
And so that, like, that small investment for 6 months or whatever literally has changed my life forever now, and remove that whole aspect of fear from my life. Then it just becomes like, you know, fear of the vulnerability again, fear of imposter syndrome, fear, like all the other little fears that we have to deal with. But yeah, again, just the more you do it, the more confident you become in what you're doing, and the more you realize that what you're creating is relatable and it means something, it's valuable. And when you finally begin to see that for yourself, that the fear continues to subside.
Yeah.
So
it's always toughest at the beginning, like just to, because you're like, is this like, is this something? Is this like before you went to your mentor? Was like, did you like, should I be doing this? Like, was there any of that kind of stuff? Like, am I the kind of person who has a mentor? Like, you know what I mean? You think those things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I had never hired a coach before in my life.
Yeah.
But I knew how much I wanted to write this book, and I knew how important it was going to be for me and for my for the readers, and just like how much it was going to continue to fuel creativity, like even having this conversation,
Totally.
like I just knew that there was going to be so many other positive ripple effects from this book that I couldn't not write it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, how do I make this the most enjoyable process while knowing it's going to be challenging?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, hiring a coach was definitely kind of like, wait, do I really not know this? Like, can I find this on YouTube? Can I, you know what I mean? But it became like also more than just a step by step. It was like support, it was encouragement, it was like camaraderie, like somebody else that had done it and been in my place, like
Yeah.
it's so comforting to know that you have somebody on your side who is right there walking through the steps with you, who's been where you are. It's like having your own personal like Stephen Pressfield with you all the time, telling you that resistance is there, but you can do this. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Love that. How has creativity interacted? Like you talked about this, project that you got to work on with your mom. How has it worked with the rest of your family and your friendships and relationships? How's that played out? Because it's quite a commitment taking on a book and deciding I'm doing this with my life. Talk to me a little about that.
Yeah, luckily I have a very supportive family. My like sister-in-law, almost basically, she is like an avid reader, and so she read all of my first drafts, which I feel so bad about now, because they were not good. But like every step of the way, she was like, "This is a good idea. Like this is something that resonated with me," because she's somebody who didn't consider herself creative at all. And so, which was really helpful for me to have feedback from people, not only her, but some other friends who didn't consider themselves creative, to read it and then find sparks within them as they were reading the first drafts. And it helped me just like really hone in the core messages that I could focus on. And then also finding people who were creative read it,
Mhm.
and like seeing which aspects of it kind of made them feel their creativity strengthen, or made them question something, or made them just be more curious about a topic.
Yeah.
I had a very solid community around me while writing it, which was very helpful, and they're continuing to support me through this. With friends and with like strangers and people that I don't know, it's been a lot of like realizations of creativity again, and quite a few people who are now telling me that they've never written before in their lives, and now they want to write a book, or they want to tell their story, or they like see the beauty in communication through writing now. And so that's been like one of the most fulfilling aspects for me personally too, because I really believe in the power of words and the meaning of words, and like delving deeply into what certain words can mean, because like there are so many different definitions. You have society, you have cultural, you have personal, you have dictionary definitions for
Yeah.
everything. And like being able to find all those connections is something that's always been like on my mind really while writing. So being able to find that spark in other people and like see it and work with them and write with them has been such a cool evolution that I didn't expect really
Yeah.
from writing this book.
Oh,
So
I
it's,
really like
yeah.
that's
Hmm.
so nice and positive. So I'm gonna follow it up. What frustrates you about creativity? What just like is like I hate this part, or just like I get stuck here often?
Yeah, I remember you saying earlier in this conversation that it like sometimes you feel like creativity goes away from you for like months,
Yeah.
and it's like trying to get that back. And there are sometimes like been days or, maybe a week or two, like since I've been writing, since I wrote my book, I was writing constantly.
Yeah.
And the days or the weeks that I did not feel like writing were the most frustrating for me
Yeah. Yeah.
because you know how fulfilling it is, you know how good it feels. And when you just can't get words out or something,
Yeah.
it's like, why? What is this? Like, what do you mean?
You just sit
Yeah.
down and you just look at it, you're like, why is this not what's not happening? What?
Yeah. What is not connected?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, ultimately, I have found as well a lot through those moments that creativity helps keep me aligned
Mm.
with my professional goals, my personal goals, and it helps keep me sane too. Like helps me understand my perspective on what's happening around me and how I can process it and adapt and adjust. And so the days that I am out of whack or out of alignment or something, I'm not staying true to my core values, those are the days that I
Yeah.
don't feel like writing.
It's weird too that once you kind of see that pattern, you like those days where it's not clicking, it feels like everything's normal, but usually something's not, that you're not
Hmm.
aware of it. And then do you find that once you get back in alignment, then it's like, okay, we're back on track here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It really has helped me realize the days when something is truly wrong, like when something
Yeah.
is really like upsetting me or getting to me that in a way that I didn't expect it to maybe,
Yeah.
or it's really helped me become more attuned and self-aware of myself, my well-being overall.
Yeah. I think what took
Mhm.
me a while to understand is like I can be having like the worst day ever and still like turn it on sometimes, but then
Mhm.
there's only like a few of those I'll get, and then it's just like nothing. But,
Yeah.
but because I'm like, but I can do it sometimes. Like I can turn around and just turn it on and
Mhm.
and have a great day of writing, but it's not sustainable.
Right.
And I think I counted on it being sustainable.
Yeah, like, okay, well, maybe if I just start writing, it'll just like help get me out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's like there's something else happening.
And you have to look at that. And again, I think that contributes to the magical thinking too, because it's all just being in alignment. It's a concept that we understand in our brain, right? It's just if
Right.
we've resolved everything, I guess, or balanced them. But again, it's still a
Mhm.
little bit of magical thinking,
Yeah, I
right?
agree. Mhm.
So it's just not that I'm trying to prove that it is. It's funny how we
Yeah.
interact with it, and those kind of
Yeah,
even Stephen Pressfield's resistance. That's just a helpful narrative. I don't know if
right.
he believes that there's like a demonic force of pushing back against everything good. I mean, maybe he does,
Yeah.
but whether you agree with that or not, you can feel that pressure,
Mhm.
and
Exactly.
it's like the force of gravity. It just wants to keep things from growing.
Right. And
It
that's what's so
everything.
frustrating about
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Like, I'm trying to build things up, and it's just like no.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
what's your favorite thing to make other than writing? Is there another thing that you love just to make, or is there a particular kind of writing you like doing?
Well, yeah, I love writing and I write in like several different ways for different reasons. And each reason has its own like method and process. It's all
Oh,
messy, but it's fun. Other than that, I've loved to bake.
yeah,
I have not stopped baking and it's crazy because I never really baked.
yeah,
So I don't know if this is just like subconsciously like the Great British Baking Show like coming through or something, but I think that like baking and cooking are super creative outlets because there's just like so many different ways that you can do different things. And I think that the more that I continue to do creativity in other realms like that, like with baking or doodling or something, that it continues to fuel my main creative outlet of writing.
yeah.
I mean, everybody else is really enjoying my baking too, so that's good.
That still brings people into the umbrella. I like that.
Yeah, come come into my writing umbrella. Here are bananas, like banana muffins or something.
A banana muffin smell, like they're one of the best smells. You come, oh my,
Yes.
banana muffins. Um,
Mm.
while you were talking about, having the baking, I think there's also this aspect of having creativity that's not necessarily in the same zones of pressure. Do you know what I mean? Your writing's under a certain
Hmm.
amount of pressure. You're putting it out into the world. But when I'm hearing about you talking about baking, that can be shared. That can be, you're not putting the pressure on that you are putting on your writing. Talk to me about those kind of
Hmm.
different outlets of creativity.
Yeah. Well, with baking, you have a recipe.
Yeah.
And I'm like, as long as I follow the recipe, like this is tried and true by somebody else, I feel like I'll do a good job.
Yeah.
So I just allow myself to kind of fall into somebody else's path. And I think that that kind of also relieves some of the creative pressure I put on myself, where I'm like physically creating and I know I'm doing something with my creative outlet and mindset, but it's not it's not the magical like aspect of me that I'm not like stressing out about it
Yeah.
or expecting too much of myself or worried about putting it out like and being vulnerable about it. If somebody doesn't like the banana muffin, I get to blame somebody else's recipe.
I like that. Thank you for the recipe. Yeah. I love that. Do you find though that sometimes people get jammed up when they do put the pressure on the wrong? Like let's say that you loved writing and baking equally, but
Hmm.
baking's not going to necessarily make you money. But if you put that pressure on there, you're going to be frustrated, right?
Hmm.
Have you seen
Yeah.
that in the people that you've talked to?
Yes. I It can definitely be like a double-edged sword, or it's where it's like, yes, it will help me, but also it's going to challenge me. It's going to hinder me.
Yeah.
And I think that the realization of that is difficult for some people to accept when they're beginning to be creative, because creativity has so many positive, powerful benefits to it.
Yeah.
And that's what most people expect out of their creative journey. But without putting yourself into those like risk taking moments, those benefits aren't as they can be fruitful, but they might be more fruitful if you are willing to take the risks that creativity poses. So I think that it's just kind of like a slow dance, trying to find that balance and figure out what the right steps are
I like
in
that.
order to make it happen.
Yeah. And the slow dance allows you time to figure out how you interact with it and what's supposed to be in your life. But the other tough part about being a creative person is that I think in order to interact with it properly, we have to be more self-aware than people who don't choose to do that, because you have to be able to be
Mhm.
like, know your limits for skill set, know your limits for like, you have to ask yourself a lot of tough questions. So let's say if you wanted to
Mhm.
be like a writer or a baker, well, baking is probably not the kind of lifestyle. Like, are you willing to put in the effort into baking, like that it would be
Mhm.
successful? And knowing, no, I don't want to do that. But unless you're asking yourself those tough questions, you can get jammed up. You can
Right.
years and waste time when
Yeah.
you never sat. If you would have sat down at the beginning and be like, do I really want to put the work it's going to take into this?
Mm.
Most people aren't doing that in their day-to-day lives. If you're just going and working and all that, I don't think reason necessarily ask yourself hard questions like that might disappoint you.
Right. Right. Mhm. Exactly, and it's about taking those risks, opening that umbrella, picking it
Yeah,
up,
yeah,
taking the action and committing to it,
yeah.
which
And when
is
you open
why
that umbrella,
I
it might bring up stuff that you don't want to think about, right?
exactly. Right. Yeah. And that's why one of the main aspects of my book is grit, because you have to work hard at it, you have to commit to it, you have to be dedicated to it, the and if you're not gritty about your creativity,
Yeah.
it can just fade away, like fall to the wayside, and that's not what we want.
So talk to me. I love, even when you were listing the five, right? Before,
Mhm.
when you said grit, like I was like, yeah, because there's something I
Mhm.
like about grit, but I like the concept. But when you're actually having to like live through the days where you have to be gritty, it's the worst. you
It
know,
is, yeah.
like the concept is like, yeah, I'm tough. I handle quite a bit, but you get a bad week where you really need that grit. It's a slog.
Mhm.
Have you
Yeah, it can definitely be challenging.
talked to me about your experience with that and grit?
Yeah, there are so many days that we wake up and we are way too hard on ourselves,
Yeah.
and I am somebody who always hold myself to a very high expectation, a very high standard. And I'm like working through it in therapy right now because like I take over responsibility for a lot of things, and like we just absorb so much of the expectations of the world around us when we don't have to.
Yeah.
And
Our
those
expectations. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and ours as well. And I think that just by realizing that creativity can be a release of that,
Mhm.
that has helped me so much in understanding where those pressures are coming from, where those expectations are coming from, how I let them get so out of hand and unattainable. And that, and being able to realize that and recognize it has helped me really define and hone my personal grit, because it's learning like how to prioritize what you're gritty about. Like you said, you
Yeah.
know, you have to make a choice, you have to choose, and you have to be willing to work at it. And if you're not willing to work at it and do the grit and like get your like hands dirty or whatever the phrases are, you know, then that might not be the grit for you.
Yeah.
Like there's another
Yeah.
grit or
Yeah.
something. It all comes down to what I think you're curious about, what you're passionate about, and what you are willing to work on.
Yeah. In that big magic book, Sarah Gilbert talks about
Mm-hmm.
the shit sandwich. And I thought that was like a good way of putting it. It's like, no matter how romantic or how amazing creativity can be in our life, eventually we're going to have to like, okay, well, I'm going to take that on. Like, and that's the other part of the umbrella
Yeah.
where it's just like, sometimes you're picking up that umbrella and it just is like gross.
Right. Yeah. You're like, oh, do I really need to pick this up? It's like wet and dirty and
But
muddy,
you're like,
but it's like,
but the
yeah.
thing is like, it's mine, right? As soon as it
Yeah,
becomes yours, that it's easier to pick it up. That's like, well, I'm choosing to
totally.
do that. Yeah. I really liked that book's very magical, like probably too
Yes.
much, but I liked some of the mental images that it produced, right?
Agreed. Totally. So I know I actually didn't realize I'm 5 minutes late to a meeting.
Okay. We can wrap this up right now.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. That's okay. Thank you so much for talking with me today. I've really enjoyed picking your brain about creativity and all that, and I'll let you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was so great to be here. I'm so looking forward to more Creative People podcasts.
Where can we find you on social media?
I'm on Instagram at The Creativity Gene, and my blog is rosegabler.com.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a fantastic day.
Rose is great, isn't she? I love everything that she had to say about that umbrella analogy. It's the perfect vision of like picking up an idea and making something with it. Oh, and then another really good piece of advice was what she had to say about tackling your fears and getting people to help you with some of them, so that you can focus on the ones that you have to take on alone. I think there's so many things in projects that we're going to have to take on. Some of them we're just going to have to fucking get through it. But there's other ones that, you know, there's going to be people in our lives that can help us figure that out. So the whole task doesn't need to be so daunting. When I started this podcast, I thought, you know, maybe I'll write a book about creativity. But then I meet people like Rose, and one of the things I'm enjoying doing is letting go of things that, you know, I kind of wanted to do and cheering on the people that are doing them. You know, Rose did it. She wrote the book about creativity, and I really admire her for that. It feels great on my end to let go of that and just be here and support people who are doing those things. So it was really great chatting with her this week. Thank you, Rose, for being on the podcast. Thank you for your journey and sharing your family's journey with us. Thank you for following that curiosity and passion and writing that book about creativity. I really enjoyed getting to know you, and I thank you for, you know, doing your part and helping us all along. Alternative title for this episode could be, oh my God, I'm creative. Now what? The podcast is sponsored by Him and Her. Today's episode was produced by me, Ryan Leacock, with music by Dusty Dex. Thank you for listening. If you like the podcast, you can subscribe and you can support the podcast via our website, creativepeople-podcast.com. Have a good week, guys. Show up, do the work, pick up that umbrella, and get to it. All right. See ya.